James, appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for having me back on. I think it's been over a year or so, isn't it, since we last spoke?
Yeah, man, it's been a couple of years. So season 3, we talked all things rugby, which we might circle back to today. But in today's discussion, before we actually jump in, maybe give viewers, listeners a little whirlwind tour of your background, and then we can tee things up for today.
Yeah, cool. So as quick as possible, 18 to 21, traveled the world, had no ambition of university at all. 21, decided to go and get an academic career. So I then ventured up to Liverpool in the northwest of England, started my undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science, rolled straight on to a master's in sports physiology, and then was lucky to start a very applied PhD in body composition, applied physiology and nutrition with professional rugby league players. So that was sponsored by a couple of pro clubs over here. And then did that for 4.5 years in total, finally graduated with a PhD. And then in that period of time, kind of did loads of different applied projects with different clubs and athletes, kind of built up my, I guess what I would term craft knowledge and craft experience of being in the trenches. And then my full first time employed role outside of the PhD was then with England football at the FA. So I had 4 years there as a performance nutritionist, working within a very good department, very good colleagues. Thoroughly enjoyed my time, but it was more recently kind of had the urge and the itch to get back into rugby. So I've recently started a role at Bristol Bears Rugby Union. So they're now based in the southwest of England. I've been there 8 weeks and thoroughly enjoying it. So
fantastic. Well, listen, we're going to circle back to the rugby side of things towards the end of the interview here today.
Yeah,
but let's kick things off on the boxing side of things. You obviously work tremendously in boxing, and recently completed the paper, a 5-year journey of one of the fighters that you work with, which is pretty fascinating. And the idea of weight cycling is obviously commonplace in weight making sports like boxing. Can you kick off the conversation here by talking about just, weight cycling in the general population? What does that look like? What are some of the risk factors? And then when we come over to the sports side of things, I mean, it's obviously entrenched in having to make weight to compete, right?
Yeah. So look, I guess first and foremost, what is weight cycling? It's what it says on the tin in a way. And I guess what I mean by that is we've probably all been there to some capacity where it might be a holiday that we've booked, or there might have been something traumatic in the family that's happened that's resulted in a load of binge eating or whatever. But most people that I've worked with, athletes and non-athletes, they have fluctuated weight to some capacity. And the fluctuation in weight is typically a change in like lean mass, but more so it's probably a change in fat mass as well. So I've got boxers that I've worked with, other combat sport athletes that they would have a gain in fat mass at some period of that 12-week or 12-month year. And then if they've got a fight kind of lined up, they then need to get in shape again to make sure that they can get on the scale and they're in a presentable place to fight. And I've been there myself. You've got a holiday booked in 8 weeks and you're not happy with how you look. And so you go on a very clean kind of nutritional plan for 8 weeks and you train hard and you get yourself into great shape. And then after that, you've kind of got the motivation of zero because we're in the winter months in the Northern Hemisphere and people feel a bit sorry for themselves. And then they
hibernate.
Yeah, they hibernate over Christmas. We eat loads and then we hit the new year and everyone wants to get back in shape again. So I guess the weight cycling in simple terms is just that increase and decrease in body mass. But a lot of the time it's an accumulation and a decrease in fat mass as well, depending on where you are in that kind of exercise and nutrition regime, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And in the general population, we obviously see as people's weights tend to fluctuate up and down quite a bit. We see increased risk of obesity and cardiovascular diseases, metabolic diseases. We don't tend to think of those things when we think of athletes because we just think athletes are going to be obviously lean, fit. Maybe we can start with another definition before we get into sort of retirement side or the later stages of an athlete's career. But, what is fat overshooting when we talk about this idea of having to make weight and get leaner to make weight?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting kind of concept that we were reading in the literature. And I guess what we were finding when we were looking at the literature, there was an amount of evidence that was showing that when individuals decrease their fat mass to try and make weight, what inevitably happens with that, and this is what we showed with the data with Rocky, is that because you've got an athlete that might be expending 3,500 calories a day, but they're not consuming 3,500 calories a day because they're actively trying to make a weight, then energy balance is obviously in a negative, and so we are losing weight. But one of the knock-on side effects of that is that some athletes, not all athletes, but in the situation with Rocky, there is an element of muscle wastage, and kind of we enter that stage of catabolism. And so because we haven't got the calories to kind of look after that muscle, yes, we are dropping fat mass because we're in that negative energy balance, but we're also doing it at the expense of dropping a little bit of lean mass. Now, what was really interesting is that you then have an athlete that might present on the scale when they've made the weight, which is great because they can now fight. They haven't lost their purse. If it's a title fight, the belts are still on the line. So it's all hunky-dory on that side of things. But then when they then finish the fight and they go back into living a life like a normal Western person would, they go out and they have dinner. They might have a beer or whatever they want to do in their social circles.
Especially after 8 or 12 week intense camp, you want to loosen the reins a little bit, right?
Right. And there's always an element of cravings for something. Okay. So when they then go back into the realm of energy balance, you could argue that it's almost gone too much the other way. And what we were seeing from some of the literature and with Rocky is that you get this, what they're terming colossal fattening. And what it essentially means is that the accumulation of fat mass is happening quicker than the accumulation of lean mass back to baseline, back to its kind of normal happy place where it was at the start of the camp. And every time that happens, weight cycling episode to the next episode, that accumulation of fat mass appears to get a little bit worse. And so that's why they termed it in the literature as this colossal fattening. And we've got some retired boxers in the UK here. I won't name names just because it would be a bit rude, but there's retired boxers here in the UK who, when they were competing and making weight, they were in great shape. When they were not in a camp, they used to balloon very heavily. Now that they're retired, they're in a very sorry state, and they are what we would probably term clinically obese. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Mark, it brings in all of the wrath of, okay, well, what's the problem of that now at 40 years old or 45 in terms of cardiometabolic disease, obesity, atherosclerosis, heart problems? And so that's one of the problems of the weight cycling.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, once we start getting into this chronically elevated blood sugars and blood pressures going up and chronic inflammation's going up, I mean, we're getting into a whole raft of problems, not just physical, but as they dovetail even into mental health, which obviously in the back end of a boxing career is already taken a bit of a toll as well.
Yeah.
But if we circle back, I mean, this is from your recent paper, 5-year analysis of weight cycling practices in male world champion professional boxer, potential implications for obesity and cardiometabolic disease. Could you just circle back and tee up again the span of that sort of 5 years and the how many fights you were looking at with this individual?
Yeah, so anyone who's followed me on social media, the individual, and he won't mind me saying, but it's Rocky Fielding from Liverpool. And I guess we were really fortunate that we had an athlete that was 100% brought into the fact that we were going to collect some data and we were going to do some research on him. He knew the benefit of it. He knew kind of how it could help him and how we could improve the weight making strategies from some of his previous kind of methods that he used. And so Rocky brought into the process, and overall we managed to track Rocky for 11 contests. So this was 11 professional registered boxing fights, and that was over a 5-year period. In there was a British title win, there was a Commonwealth title win, and then he won the regular world title over in Germany against Tyrone Zoiger. And then that was the belt that he then defended in his final 11th contest against none other than Canelo at Madison Square Garden in New York.
Amazing.
So we basically had 11 contests over a 5-year period that we managed to collect data. And it's funny, I was just on a previous call there where we're actually going to present this at a workshop in the UK. And, we didn't have a research question at the start of this at all. It wasn't like a traditional, this is the hypothesis, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to find out. It was the fact that we were fortunate to have access to a very good athlete who was willing to buy into the process. And so I decided, amazing, I'm going to collect loads of data on you. And that's what we did for 5 years. And then, I sat down with two of my colleagues here, Professor James Morton and Dr. Carl Evans. And that was where we decided, look, we've got some great data here that, yes, it's N of 1. Yes, it's a case study. It's not how everyone does it, but there's a real gap in the literature in this space. So let's put it out there and let's see how, see if it's received well.
It's amazing to be able to get, elite professional athletes, because that's always a challenge, isn't it, of interpreting, research and university level active, fit individuals, but they're not the ones that are playing at the top of their game or world champion boxers. So it is really insightful to be able to see just that breadth of data over 5 years. And, if we even just look at things like a breakdown, a macro breakdown of what a fighter like this might be consuming, outside of that 7 days where they're going to be trying to make weight, what does that roughly look like for a fighter like Rocky?
Yeah, so in the paper we put a kind of typical training day nutritional intake, but what we were trying to do there was at best go a little bit above what his resting metabolic rate would be. Now, bearing in mind that on most days on most days there was double training days, if not triple training days. So his RMR was in the region of between 1,900 to 2,000 calories. And then his typical energy intake was around 2,400. Mm-hmm. So we were above RMR, but if a double training day is happening, he was definitely in an energy, negative energy balance. And so where possible, we tried to keep the carbohydrates relatively high at kind of 3 grams per kilo, so that he was getting the fuel that he needed for those training sessions. And that's where we would then manipulate what we would term, and what most people have heard of, is the 3 T's of nutrition. So timing, type, and total. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to be really specific about, okay, where does the 3 grams per kilo of carbohydrate get consumed? Let's have it in and around those training sessions so that we're fueling those sessions correctly and we're recovering from them correctly. We then tried to keep protein, what I would term on the high side, at 2.5 grams per kilo, bearing in mind the literature, in and around, with all the meta-analysis that have happened, at 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo. Mm-hmm. And then we kept fat at 1 gram per kilo as well. So that was kind of the summary of the energy intake and the macros. And then we were just quite boring and basic, but this is what the boxer wanted to eat and he was happy to consume. And so it was whey protein shakes, porridge oats, skimmed milk, banana. And then we would bring in, I worked very closely with a food preparation company where they would then prepare and cook his lunch and dinner. We'd get that sent to Rocky twice a week. So it was fresh. He didn't have to freeze it and he could just heat it up in the microwave. And then we'd finish just with some high protein snacks like salmon slices, cottage cheese, etc. And then casein protein pre-bed. So that was a bit of a bland run through of nutritional intake. Of course, that did fluctuate throughout the camp. Nobody's going to eat that for 8 weeks, but it was typical of what it would look like on a whole.
And for Rocky in that week into making weight, and we'll circle back to the different camps here as this relates to sort of the fat overshooting concept. But, for him, in terms of some of the strategies that you guys implemented to be able to make weight, can you, highlight some of those for us and maybe contrast to some of the things you've seen in the industry in your time of some of the, the old school or the strategies that are potentially harmful?
Yeah. So, before I started working with Rocky, I had no experience of combat sport athletes. And so I dug out the literature and I read the literature, and it was looking at Gary Slater, Louise Burke, Reed Rill, some of Cole's stuff, some of James's stuff, and just seeing what the literature was saying. And then that's what I implemented with Rocky. So in that final 7-day period, depending where his weight was, we always tried to get him between that 5 to 8% of above his kind of weigh-in weight. And then when we were there, we would then fluctuate around with, okay, well, what tools are we going to use out of the toolbox? So it might have been, let's reduce the fiber intake that Rocky's going to consume. Let's bring low residue intake into the diet. Mm-hmm. Things like giving him, if he wanted carbohydrates in the final 72, 48 hours leading into the weigh-in, then let's try and bring it in with food that actually weighs quite light. So as an example, a 50-gram bag of Haribo might give you 100 grams of carbs, but it only weighs 50 grams. Whereas a jacket potato that might weigh 0.3 kilo would give you 50 grams of carbs. And so we were then playing around with the weight of food that we were giving him to give it the energy. And then, of course, bringing down salt in the diet, having less sodium going onto the food. Over in New York, we were linking up with restaurants to basically ask them to cook the lean turkey and the white rice with no salt.
Yeah.
So we just wanted it grilled and boiled in plain water.
I imagine you had to repeat that a few times because they're so used to cooking it with salt. It's like, no, we really want it without salt.
Yeah. I mean, and this is where you talk about, networking, right? So a good friend of mine and colleague, David Dunn, he's been to New York a lot with some of his fighters. And so he said, look, there's a restaurant 50 meters away from Madison Square Garden. They're Irish. They own it. They get it. They understand what the boxers want.
Yeah.
So go in there and tell them that you're working with a boxer, explain it to them, and they'll do whatever you want. And so,
nice.
Even having that link, the week of Rocky's fight over there was outstanding. So yeah, we would, where possible, we would try and implement those little kind of ways to reduce that weight down, by 1 to 1.5 kilo or 2% of body weight. And then the last thing that we would ever start to bring out would then be fluid. So I would keep Rocky drinking fluid really all of the week of the weigh-in week. But if he was weighing in on a Friday at midday or 1 o'clock, it would only really be Thursday afternoon, evening that we would start to bring fluid intake down. And then he would do, normally, depending where his weight was, he might do a little sweat out the night before and then go to bed. And then he would do his last sweat out the morning of the weigh-in. And when I say sweat out, this is what, having worked in team sport, I always bring this comparison into it, because Rocky would normally lose around 2.5 kilos the morning of a weigh-in.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds like a lot to come out, but I've got rugby players that will lose 4 kilos in an 80-minute training session.
Yeah. And
no one at the club would ever look at them and go, oh my God, we're dehydrating him on purpose. This is dangerous. He's sweating. We can't do that. Of course, he's
accepted as part of it. It's just what happens. Same with basketball.
Exactly. So the rugby player post training session gets on the scale. Wow, that was a hot session. And what does he do? He rehydrates and he gets the electrolytes back into him. So yes, Rocky would lose 2.5 kilo on the morning of weigh-in, but I guess because of my background in rugby, it was never anything that alarmed me, because I was like, he's just sweating like a normal person sweats. So I was always comfortable with that. And then he would make the weight, and then obviously we would go through with the rehydration and refuel strategy.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point, obviously that's, that's a great point in the sense that it's like anybody else exercising and training. We're going to lose weight through sweat. Having had Reed Reel on last season and talking about the MMA and a lot of the old school strategies that still circulate in mixed martial arts, could you touch on in boxing what you've seen or what you still see in with various fighters or camps where that is taken to the next level of sweatsuits and excessive saunas or some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, touch wood. I haven't worked with a boxer that kind of carries on doing that. But of course, I know within the circle, it still happens. Boxers, there's still some that are a little bit defensive to kind of buy into some of the literature and the strategies that are out there, because they still want to do the old school culture of it. But yeah, look, we still
get scared of taking on something new, right? They just want to lean on their old habits.
Yeah. And exactly that. And sometimes, there might be a little bit of pressure from the coach to say, look, we don't want to change anything this camp for whatever reason. But yeah, it's sweatsuits, it's dehydrating themselves early. So I've seen that a few times where, they might start on a Monday and start reducing intake of fluids then, which of course, by the time you get to the weigh-in on the Friday, you are already, a prune that's been out in the sun for 6 days. So yeah, I've seen that. I've seen the sweatsuits, sitting in the saunas for, excessive amount of times. Saunas can be a good way to help the body sweat. And I would say actually when they're done controlled at the right temperature, I don't see a major issue with it, but it's when it becomes hours and hours and hours on end. And then, there are the kind of laxatives and things like that you still hear people taking, which again is a shame that there's still athletes out there doing it, because there's so many practitioners, good practitioners, that are willing to help. And I saw the other day actually Aspen Lads on Twitter. Again, I think it was the 4th time in her career that she was really struggling on the scale to make the weight. And it's a little bit distressing to see that, I think, sometimes. It's not nice to watch, but, I just hope at some point she seeks a little bit of guidance around how to do it better and improve those strategies. But it still happens. We're still seeing it, aren't we?
Yeah, and it seems to really stand out now when you see that, the more evidence-based practices and what can be done to actually manage these things. And when you still see somebody weighing in, losing consciousness or whatnot, I mean, it's now it really seems to stand out even more so than maybe, 10, 20 years ago. But circling back to, to your work with Rocky, you talk about how towards the end of his career, I mean, fat mass being a little higher, fat-free mass being lower in the various camps. We see that in retired athletes, obviously gaining more weights, retired boxers after their careers. And interestingly, you note in the paper that this isn't attributed to anything genetic either. This is, and so, what are some of the other factors that are at play here with potentially, you touched on some of them, just the normal life of wanting to go out and have something to eat, but whether it's throughout that career or even the post-career that might be playing a role in this whole fat overshooting.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think one of the areas that I guess I know firsthand with Rocky was I only grin, but it's the lifestyle changes that happen. You've only got to speak to aunties and uncles who now find it very difficult to lose that fat mass and stay leaner the older they're getting. And with Rocky, I don't think it's a genetics thing. I think there's just an element of lifestyle factors there, and that's what we're seeing with a lot of the retired athletes. Training begins to drop. All of a sudden, they've had a career where they've been making weight their whole life. They want to go out and they want to enjoy themselves, and they, I guess, indulge on some of the vices that they couldn't do when they were a professional athlete. So there's definitely a lifestyle factor there where, that's having a contribution factor to the increase in fat mass. But yeah, also, you look at this hyperphagic response that the body seems to go through, having followed a really strict and stringent nutritional intake, and then this almost rebound hyperphagia that happens. And I think it's the Minnesota starvation study where they saw similar results in that, where following kind of a nutritional intake where the negative energy balance was there, and then the refeed after that, we get this rebound hyperphagia and this overshooting of the fat mass. So there's definitely something happening when that body, or when that human rather, goes back into that baseline state and we get that reshoot.
100%. And it's interesting. I mean, even talking to Eric Trexler, a few seasons ago with regards to just athletes and how they view exercise. I mean, I think so many of us enjoy exercise. It's embedded in our lifestyle, and we know that it relates to good health outcomes. Whereas for certain athletes, exercise can almost be a form of not necessarily punishment, but it's always used as in terms of its intense fashion. So I know in American football, a lot of players, after so many seasons of having to train that hard, the last thing they want to do is exercise, because it's just connected to the intensity and the grueling efforts and everything. I imagine there might be a little bit of that in boxing. What do you think in terms of just, guys having to go through the rigors over decades of these intense sessions?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I'm just looking at the area in the paper that we kind of wrote about it here, and kind of Miles and Chan in their 2020 paper, they talk about the central feature of the hypothesis that weight cycling predisposes obesity is that during each weight cycle, which is what you're talking about there, the amount of fat regained is greater than that previously lost. And the phenomenon of fat overshooting is thought to be driven by that rebound hyperphagia that primarily occurs in the attempt to restore the fat-free mass. So, it's a fascinating area. And I look at some of the other boxers that I work with, who I've got Chris Billum-Smith now, who cruiserweight level, I think the heaviest he ever goes is about 100 kilo. And he weighs in at 90.6. So he will go through a period of probably 4 kilos of acute weight loss in that final week. So really, he's only ever at best 6 kilos above what he needs to be cutting in the final week, if that makes sense. And that's at his work.
Not much delta there, right?
Correct. And the way that I always look at, if you look at the figures that we presented in the paper, we've got these, we enter at the start of the camp at 84, then it goes down to 82, and then we have this big drop, and then bang, it goes back up. And so that almost roller coaster effect, or ECG on a kind of figure. The way that I describe it with Chris Billam-Smith when I was talking to him about it was that you still have that, but the amplitude of your peaks and troughs is far less. So we're still getting these little rises and peaks throughout the camp. But isn't it interesting how you seem to stay relatively in shape the whole of your 12-month year, and we don't get this fat overshooting once you've come out of the camp? You might put on 3 or 4 kilos, but then he's back where his baseline is. And I think that is the golden ticket for these combat sport athletes who want to compete multiple times in a year. Surely you're better off just not putting your body through so much stress, and where possible, trying to maintain 3, 4, 5, 6 kilos above your weight, so that you've only got to lose that when you go into the camp. And if you look at some of the professionals that are still fighting now, Canelo, Mayweather, okay, end of his career, Pacquiao, end of his career. But, they pretty much stayed in shape the whole of their career and were on weight whenever they needed to be on weight. And, they come out of a camp and they don't really have this fat overshooting. They might put on a couple of kilos, but it's nothing drastic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it would seem that the greater the delta with that fat overshoot, the greater the hyperphagia, the greater that appetite would be, just from almost an evolutionary standpoint of being in these periods of starvation, where then the brain's basically saying, hey, when I get my chance, we're going to make sure we're getting enough fuel in here. And, if we look at this from a real 30,000 foot view in terms of the actual associations, the sport as a whole, obviously scheduling, as you know, is in the boxing world and the fight world is quite random. Are there things that some of these associations need to look at more seriously with being able to support athletes over a career? I mean, obviously difficult to implement all in one shot, but it does become a question, doesn't it, of how often or how much preparation should boxers really have?
Yeah. I think it's a two-pronged approach, if I'm honest, Mark. I think one, it's on the athlete. And I do think the scheduling of bouts, we had Rocky, he had 6 weeks notice for the world title fight, and fair play to his trainer at the time, because his trainer was constantly saying to him, stay ready, stay ready, stay ready. And so he was. But 6 weeks notice, if he was 17 kilos above his weight, like he was in one of his camps, you're never making the weight ever. So it was, you might make it, but it's not going to be safe, and it's probably not something that I want to be part of.
Not going to be feeling good on fight night. Yeah.
So there's, I think on the fighter, it's stay in shape and stay where you are and stay where you need to be. But I think the scheduling about, the federations and stuff could do more about having more time for the athletes there. So I would say two-pronged approach, really.
Nice. Well, listen, if we take a minute here to pivot a little bit and talk about something else that's been keeping you busy over the last year, 18 months or so, writing a new book all about performance nutrition. Can you tell us a little bit about, why you decided to write that book?
Yeah. Thanks for the segue into this. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm really passionate about our industry, and I 6-7 years ago was a student doing his master's and had a career goal of working for the national team, and that was at England Rugby. So I've always had that vision and goal, and I quite early on knew what my path looked like to get there. So I knew that if this was where I want to be, this is what I've got to do in the 5 years before that to try and make that a reality. And recently I'm sure everyone has this themselves, but students reaching out on LinkedIn, just asking me about the career, what advice have you got? What did you do when you were studying? Is there anything extra I can do outside of academics, et cetera, et cetera? And I was getting lots and lots of similar questions. And so I thought to myself, look, I'm going to make the most of this. I'm going to open my network. I'm going to speak to people that I know in the industry, colleagues of mine who are all working what I would deem as successful practitioners right now in their own right. and I'm going to interview them. And so I did. I've interviewed 10 male, female from different clubs, organizations, sports, Australia, England. And I've asked them the questions that people were asking me, because I can only give one side of the story. I can only tell you how I did it, but let's see how everyone else does it as well, and see whether there's common themes that we can begin to bucket. And lo and behold, there's some real clear themes and things that people can do outside of the traditional, I'm going to go and get a master's, that I think would put them leaps above some of the other colleagues on their course that are studying the same course as them. So that is basically the essence of the book. And then I've given some views and thoughts and reflections on each one of the interviews. And look, I'm not just saying it, but I genuinely learn about each person in more depth. And also I took some real tips away for myself to go away and implement in my own practice. And so
I was going to say, what were some of maybe the surprises or the insights that caught you off guard? Some of the things that really resonated, in some of those interviews.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that most, if not all of the people said, and this sounds so simple and easy, but how many of us get it right, was just being a good person. And that is very, very vague.
30,000 feet.
Yeah.
Don't be a dickhead.
Yeah, but right, that's the All Blacks mentality. Don't be an annoying person. Just be a good person. And then how you define being a good person will be different. How I define it might be different to you. But then if you can stick to that every single day that you go into the organization, I think you'll get far with it. And I look at some practitioners and some students that might be struggling to get jobs, or they got a job but then lost it because of whatever reason, and sometimes you peel it back and you think, well, were you a good person? Were you a good bloke or a good woman? So that's one thing that has definitely come out. And then like the mentor side of it, a lot of the people I've spoke to have had mentors in the industry, and they've had people that have guided them and shown them the ropes and said, look, this was the mistake that I've made. Don't make that mistake. I'll help you not make it. And this is how you can become better. And so and Professor James Morton summarized it great. He was like, if there's people in the industry that have got more experience than you and they've made the mistakes already, why wouldn't you want to learn from them? Why wouldn't you want to tap into their brains and ask them their advice and their questions and get them to check and challenge what you're doing to make sure that it's of the level and standard it needs to be? So that's that's kind of the premise of the book. My plan is that this will be volume 1, and then we're going to bring out loads of the books, and I'm just going to keep interviewing different practitioners across the world, because like I said, I've only got one journey, and it's only the way that I've done it. It's not how everyone else does it. So
awesome. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Is the book out now, James? When can folks get their hands on that?
It's not out yet. No, it's with the editor is finishing up now. Then it's going to a formatter, and then I'll be doing pre-sales on it. So yeah, just keep an eye out for some of the social links that go out for that. But fingers crossed, touch wood, it should be out before Christmas.
Nice. We'll definitely include all those links in there. And if we now segue into your current role, Bristol Bears, obviously your PhD work in rugby, could you, only a few months on the job, I think at the moment, can you give us a little glimpse into what a typical day might look like for you these days?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the club kind of full time, which is great role, great position. And what I must say about Bristol Bears is that they're a fantastic club to be part of. I've only been there a few months, but the staff and players have all been very welcoming. And they're a club with clear vision and ambition. And that's what excites me about working in that environment. But typical day to day for me would be checking in with the chef, making sure everything's okay from a food point of view. The chef is outstanding as well, so there's not too many issues there.
Nice.
And then some real education with the players. So, the classics around fueling for match play, like are they genuinely fueling aligns to the evidence-based literature right now? In all of my time in sport at the moment, in my short career, there's not many athletes that genuinely do it consistently week in, week out. And so that's a real area that we're going after, making sure that the players firstly understand the top line level of the literature, but then also importantly, how they can do it. How do they hit 6 grams per kilo or 8 grams per kilo? what does it look like and how can you do it every day? And then, of course, the recovery side of stuff with the players. So there's been some short snippet presentations around fueling and recovery. And we're just trying to bring the education up for the players, and then making sure that body compositions and the nutritional intake in and around training is where it needs to be.
Yeah, it's always a fascinating thing, isn't it? With, obviously being able to raise a level of education. And then, athletes, like any person, are busy in their lives with demands and talking heads. And so the idea of having some simple rules or heuristics for them to just, their natural default becomes more towards what you want them to be doing rather than some of the old behaviors that they had before. Like, can you talk a bit about that idea of simplicity or having some kind of simple rules that can allow you to be able to raise that playing field for the athletes?
Yeah, so there's two things here that I'll speak about. One is the education and the why. And then the second is diet plan versus lifestyle change. Mm. And so the education and the why, I'm a student myself, and I always will be. And I'm really passionate about people understanding why they're doing something, because I genuinely believe that if a player understands why protein intake is important for his recovery after a training session, you don't have to sell it to him because he understands why it's important. I've been there in the past where you just say to the player, get that shake down here. And they don't really know why they're taking it. They don't understand what it's doing for the body, how it can help with muscle recovery. So in my one-to-ones, I will pick off what is your current understanding of leucine? Do you understand what leucine is at all? And if they don't, then I'll explain it to them in a very simple term. And what you find then, or what we found very quickly, is that you don't have to go chasing them to take shakes anymore. You don't have to ask them to make sure that they're increasing intake of rocket leaves a day before a game, because they understand, oh, there's an element of nitrate in rocket. I get it. Like, I understand why you want me to have it. So the education and the why has been brilliant. And Graham Close has always said to me, you should be able to answer 3 levels of why. So why am I taking a protein shake? Why is it important? And why or how is it going to help me?
Yeah.
If you can answer that with an athlete, majority of the times after 3 why questions, they're going to be brought into the process. So that's really important. And then the other side of it was, how many athletes will sit down with us and say, can you write me a diet plan? And I've never seen, apart from boxers who might stick to it for like the 8-week camp because they've got that weigh-in that they need to hit. I actually think what we're better off doing is looking at current nutritional behaviors and asking them what they think they do well now, and then asking them what they think they can do better. And then it becomes a simple exercise of, let's tweak little areas of your current lifestyle and just improve them slightly. So, okay, at the moment you're having dinner and you're not having anything before bed. Why is that? Well, I don't think I need anything. And then you educate them and say, this is why it would be important to have something protein-based pre-sleep. They understand the why, and then you've tweaked a nutritional behavior there by saying, right, let's now make it a routine that after dinner we're having this before bed. That's not putting them on a diet plan. That's just adding and tweaking something that they're doing okay already and just improving it for the better. And that's where I found the biggest wins with players. I'm never going to go into that rugby club and tell players that they can or can't do this. I'm going to explain the reason why this might be better, why this might not be helping your inflammation at the moment, and what I would suggest to be the solution.
So great to see the trend towards this, because, for so long it's been those sort of diet templates that players get. And it's sort of like catching the fish for them, if you will, right? They're not really understanding how their behaviors are impacting this whole story. And, to your point, you get guys who just rock up to, whether it's basketball, American football, I'm sure sports over here, like football, where players will just have, a croissant for breakfast and then roll up to training. And you start to see, wait a minute, if we could just correct this pattern of this part of the day or this part of the day, we actually start to get towards some of these totals that we're after, or the frequency that we're after. So, that's really cool to see. And imagine your players, to your point, like the compliance is a lot better as well, isn't it? When you start nudging these certain lifestyle patterns.
Yeah, exactly that. And there's, we've all seen the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and some of us would have read it, some of us might not, but, building better habits and normal behaviors or better behaviors with athletes is key. And I think it's really important as well, everyone will do it their own way. But what I've learned, certainly in my career at the moment, is that everyone will learn different. So the scientific figure that you pull up on a screen might land really well with 30% of the athletes because they love it. They love the data. They want to know what the literature says. 30% of the players might not care about the literature. They trust you because you're in the job that you're in. And so you've just got to tell them, don't show me the figure. Tell me what protein's doing and then tell me what I need to do. And I trust you. And then the other 30% might not want to be told what to do at all. They might not want the literature, but you've just got to subtly give them an option and say, look, why don't you try this? I think this might be better for you, and let them make the decision themselves. Because I've also worked with tricky athletes that if you tell them to do something, then defensive wall comes up. Who are you to tell me to do something? Whereas if you give them the option, look, if it was me in your position, this is what I would be doing. But ultimately, you decide what goes in your body. And in those situations, more times than not, I've seen those players begin to gravitate to the behavior that you want them to do.
Yeah, it's amazing how that 30% it really is all about the mental, psychological side of just finding the right way to be able to connect with them versus the actual, to your point, driving home of the information or pushing something on them because, like you said, their first response is to back away, and now you're creating more distance than you are between the practitioner and the athlete.
And it's all about, and we've all heard it, haven't we? About flexing your style and being able to adapt in your situation that you're in. And what I try and do with my guys anyway is really just get to know them first. Like I want to know what you like. I want to know what gets you out of bed in the morning. I want to know what team you support, and getting to know the person first, building that level of trust and rapport. It becomes a lot easier to then say, look, by the way, mate, I think you'd be better off having this shake here because this is how it could help you with your recovery or your fueling or whatever it might be. So, I think we've heard previously, or I spoke previously about the kind of trust equation that Graham Close said to me. And I always try and follow that wherever possible with athletes.
I was going to say, it's always amazing how even in a 10-minute conversation, you could spend 9.5 minutes talking about who they support, family, friends, all these things. And then the last 30 seconds could be given that little direction that you want to give to an athlete. And that's actually done the job versus sometimes I think we're so used to thinking about having to use all that time to inform and educate. Yeah. But to your point, to that 30% of athletes that do struggle with that, we're better off spending most of our time just connecting with the person and then trying to leave some hints and nudge behaviors in the right direction. So that's tremendous. Well, listen, James, I know you're a busy guy. I don't want to take up more of your time here. Where can people stay connected with all your fantastic work and, keep tabs on when the book drops?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, just my name, James Morhen, and then on Instagram at Morehen Performance. And then I've also got the website, morehenperformance.com. So yeah, always happy to reach out and speak to people. Speak to people, and yeah, if they drop me a line on any of them, I'll get back to them. And then the book, there is a sign up tab on the website and Instagram page, and so we've had 200 people sign up and they're interested in buying it, which is great. Amazing. And I'll keep people updated via that link. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, we'll include all those links as well. And once again, man, appreciate the time.
No worries. Thanks very much. Take care.